Around 5 o'clock in the evening of February 17, 1982, Muscovites working near the Aviamotornaya station were heading home. As always at this time, the subway was filled with people and the station attendant on duty turned on the backup escalator so as not to create a crowd. Less than half an hour later, one of the most tragic events in the history of the Moscow metro occurred. Before I get to the topic, I want to ask you to like this video. That way you will give great support to me and my channel. By the way, write in the comments, did you know about these tragic events that happened in the Moscow subway? So you're on Wisioner channel, and in this video I will tell you about the collapse of the escalator in the Moscow subway in 1982. Let's begin. The Soviet state cared about making the subway ride to your destination if not comfortable, then at least bearable. Of course, old cars were in no hurry to be replaced with new ones, and cleanliness was poorly associated with the internal contents of the stations and passages, but it was still cheap, relatively comfortable and convenient. The number of people served per day reached several million. The mornings and evenings were especially busy, which is not surprising. Everyone was going to and coming back from work. Everyone used to consider the subway practically the safest mode of transportation, because there were almost never any serious accidents. At most small maintenance weeks, lasting up to a few days, and then once in 5 years. But in February '82, these beliefs and similar certainties were ruthlessly rolled over. On the evening of February 17th, when the clock at Moscow's Aviamotornaya station read about 4:30, the rush of subway passengers began to increase. The working day was drawing to a close, and tired people hurried off to relax at home or in a bar with friends. In order to break up the dense stream of people going down, it was decided to turn on the escalator number 4, which had been inoperative all day. The heavy mass of people instantly filled the escalator and caused a slight jam. It was the hour of rush hour, and it was just observed by metro workers, who also wanted to get home quickly. For half an hour, until 5 in the evening, nothing extraordinary happened. Everything worked in its normal mode. Then all hell broke loose. Tragedy and chaos. Gradually, escalator number 4 began to speed up. The automatic handrails were the first to accelerate. At first no one paid much attention to it, they just said they would go faster downstairs. Some passengers on the adjacent tracks even smiled, watching how quickly their fleeting subway acquaintances rushed down. But soon the smiles were replaced by grimaces of horror. In a matter of seconds, the escalator was twice its normal speed. People, not having time to get off the steps, began to fall and form a pile of intertwined human bodies. Under the weight of the remaining passengers on the track, somewhere around 12 tons, the mechanism began to crack and collapse on the move. One of the steps stood on end, followed by the rest. The pile below continued to grow. People flew with a bullet onto the floor, onto other people. Some miraculously slipped through the heap and ended up on the floor behind it, all scratched and bruised. Some people's shoes, socks, coats, and underwear began to get sucked into the crevice where the escalator belt disappeared. Some tried in desperation to jump to the neighboring tracks, but the balustrades could not withstand it, and whole holes were formed where the unsuccessful escapees fell. And the number of people on the floor below only continued to increase. It all happened literally in a few seconds. Very quickly the machine operator, who regulated the mechanisms, understood that the problem was in the escalator and promptly intervened in the situation, applying the brake. But it did not work. The steep downward movement continued, and the tape was about 54 meters long, and there were still people on it. Already the bones were crunching. People on the neighboring tracks and nearby were either frozen on the spot by what they saw, or screaming in horror when they saw the first blood on the floor. The driver, after an unsuccessful attempt to stop the movement of the escalator, pressed the emergency brake, but for some reason this did not help either. Fortunately, seeing upstairs that something was wrong, the flow of people stopped its movement, at least on the ill-fated 4. Pretty soon the track was completely empty, but it never stopped running at a rapid pace. Down below, people were gradually coming to their senses. Those who were more or less alright stepped aside or helped the crash victims more than they did. The real horror was the unmoving bodies lying in a pool of blood, gradually increasing in size. The station director, the police and firemen were called in. But the ill-fated escalator kept going downhill at breakneck speed. The consequences. Soon authorized bodies arrived on the scene. The injured were sent home with medical assistance, and some were sent to hospital. They tried to remove the dead bodies without attracting attention, and all subway workers were prohibited from discussing what had happened at home or talking about it with anyone at all. The Moscow authorities also ordered the capital's press to remain silent. Only one newspaper, on February 18, gave a short description of the events the next day. It took 7 to 8 sentences in all, and was humbly placed somewhere in the corner of the last pages. In the factories where the victims were working, and it was mostly factory workers who suffered, it was forbidden to post obituaries or raise the subject in any way at general meetings. They say, why bother with it? Why talk about bad things and spoil the mood of the workers? It was not even organized to collect money for the funeral. The bosses strenuously pretended that nothing had happened. But despite this, and the huge size of Moscow, where at that time lived more than 8 million people, the rumors spread immediately. And like any word of mouth, everything was distorted, sometimes to fantastic proportions. The closest to the truth stories told of at least 30 dead, and about 100 wounded. The most bloodthirsty fantasists, on the other hand, reported that the death toll from the accident reached 100, and that there was a big hole in the floor, where helpless people fell into, one after another, as into some mechanical hell. In fact, there were far fewer victims, which in no way diminishes the scale of the tragedy. The official report of the investigation stated that there were 8 fatalities and 30 injured with only minor or serious injuries. One man had to have his leg amputated. The cause of the tragedy. A committee was immediately organized to investigate the accident. Each worker at the station was questioned individually, long and with passion. Each one had a separate folder, where it was written who did what and at what time, and the moment of the accident was not recorded down almost every second. In the end, after almost 9 months, the investigation was completed. It was read in November '82 in the Moscow court. The cause of the tragedy was so silly and ridiculous, and on the other hand, so are that somehow you are not surprised by it. A vicious escalator. 6 months before the accident, the mechanisms of the escalators were upgraded, some parts of the old type were replaced with newer ones, in order to improve the quality of work. And the thing is that according to the instructions, the algorithm for setting up escalators has now been changed. There were a few additional actions aimed at ensuring the safety of the work. And it turned out that nobody followed those instructions. New parts continued to be calibrated to the old standards, leading to premature wear and tear. In general, during those 6 months when such a mess was going on, everyday people who used the escalators at Aviamotornaya station were in mortal danger. After all, at any moment the mechanism could fail and a terrible mess of human bodies would start. In the end, the culprits were all punished and sent to prison for terms commensurate with their transgression. There were rumors among the people at the time that the main culprit for what had happened had to be the driver, but it was his actions that were considered the most effective in the situation. The station manager was removed from his position. Although no one proved his guilt directly, he was still in charge of the station. Therefore, he should have been punished. Escalator number 4R was closed for many years. Until the mid-90s the passage was blocked by a sign repairs in progress. And no one has ever announced the names of those who died under the Soviet Union. Not a single news program told about the tragedy or the conclusion of the commission that investigated it. No compensation was paid to the relatives, the case was hushed up and forgotten, like so much unflattering stuff in the Soviets. Separately, it is mentioned that soon after the incident at Aviamotornaya, a delegation from the United States was to fly to Moscow, and that's why everything was kept so secret. Well, nothing is known about it exactly, but it sounds very plausible. And only 10 years later, after the collapse, one of the capital's newspapers published an article devoted to the memory of the victims. It was there, for the first time, that the names of the victims of criminal negligence were read out. Even though they were published much later, they were honored. Conclusion. This story, which happened in the early days of the Soviet Union, clearly reflected two fundamental problems of that state. The first was the criminal negligence of the working people, due to which accidents were quite frequent. But usually they were quite local, and were quickly corrected. This time it turned out differently. It is quite possible that instead of carefully reading the instructions, they were brushing fish with beer or vodka. The second is the total disrespect of the state for its citizens, when the illusion of the infallibility of the socialist system's existence was much more important than justice and common human treatment. Unfortunately, both the first and the second have not been completely eradicated from today's everyday life. But that is what history is for, to learn from our mistakes and not to repeat them again. Subscribe to the channel and share this video with your friends. Give it a thumbs up. Write in the comments about what else interesting you can tell about this video. See you in the new video.